Hi, this is Outlaw Bookseller, and I thought I'd do part 2 of my books of the year because time is moving on, and I've spent the day sort of scheduling and uploading things ready for the next couple of weeks, and I realised that, I've got an awful lot of shooting to do, an awful lot of work to do in work, so I thought we'd better get on with it. And I decided to slump and take it easy because that's the kind of mood I'm in. So books of the year, as I said in part 1, this isn't essentially books which came out this year. Some of them did come out this year, some were reissued this year, some were hardcover, some last year that have come out this year in paperback. Some are just things I've read, and I've picked up a pile of things at random. I've tried not to cover anything I've already covered in other videos on the channel. So here we go, and it's going to be pretty random, but that's the whole point of this, is that, you don't get the regular stuff. You don't get the sort of Sunday supplement, critical agreement on what's great. You're getting something a little bit different. So these are things to watch out for. You might want to spend your book tokens on if you get any for Christmas. Oops, I said the C word. First of all, one for the natural history and science fans. The Missing Links by Ross Barnett, who's a biologist, and is subtitled The Past and Future of Britain's Lost Mammals. And chapter by chapter, it goes through all those great extinct creatures like woolly rhinoceroses and what have you, and, bears, wolves, less sort of exotic fauna, shall we say, which used to once be on our shores. And he goes into things like, should we clone them up from existing DNA and so on. And it goes chapter by chapter, and it's really interesting. And it just shows you what we've lost. It's a great shame. We used to have lots of massive animals in this country, and now, of course, we've killed them all. But it's really, really interesting, and it does pretty much confirm that what killed the larger animals off in this country was people. But it's not all grim. It's done with quite a light touch, and I really enjoyed it. I do like natural history, and this hasn't really had a lot of attention. I think it's deserving of more. So that's a good survey of the animals we used to have and what the potential is for bringing them back or not. So The Missing Links by Ross Barnett. Secondly, a book I have mentioned before. I mentioned it the other day, but I'm going to mention it again because it's such fun, which is Gareth E. Rees's Unofficial Britain. This is out in paperback now, came out in paperback in the summer. It's had very little attention. It is in the better bookshops out there, and it's all about the odd places in Britain, sort of pylons, car parks, underpasses, all those sort of things. It's written with a very light touch. It's got the psychogeography in it. It's all about the margins of sort of our lives, and I really enjoyed this. Actually, I think it's fantastic, and he's got a good turn of phrase, quite witty. It's not sort of like the Ian Sinclair thing where you've got your rather dull uncle who knows everything about everything, and unfortunately manages to keep it dull. It's lively and informative. So get that. It's very diverting, and it's a real change from the usual thing. So Unofficial Britain by Gareth E. Rees. And as I think I said in another video, he's actually done a book about car parks, believe it or not. Unbelievable. Moving on, the big gift book that I would recommend for anybody who likes books is the Penguin Modern Classics book, which has just come out very recently. It's £30 in hardcover by Henry Elliott, and it's a massive cloth-bound tome, as you can see. It's a lovely sort of cloth, and it's beautiful, and it's illustrated throughout. And Penguin Modern Classics, if you don't know, you must be living under a rock, is the greatest reissue imprint in the world, and since 1961, so it's an anniversary this year. It'll be in 2021. It's a centenary look at every book that's ever been published in the imprint. And if you want to know about modern literature, and if you want to expand your reading, Penguin Modern Classics is the first place to start and continue. People say, how did you become so well read? Well, one way I became I would say rather widely read, because I don't think anybody's well read, there's simply too much out there, but to become widely read, something I do, if I see a Penguin Modern Classic I've never seen before, an unfamiliar name, I pick it up and take a look, and I'll often buy it and read it. And that way you learn about the whole corpus of world literature. And this is an ideal gift for anybody who loves books. It works geographically and chronologically. It's full of fantastic pictures, and it's absolutely lovely. And at £30, you know, it's nearly 500 odd pages, and you know, this will take you years to get through, and it's absolutely fantastic. You can pick it up, you can pick it down. I can't say enough good about it, really, if I'm honest. So that really is kind of almost my bookie book of the year. Something I really like from an American publisher called Valoncourt, who they're sort of Anglophiles, Valoncourt. They some of their books are available over here, not many of them. They do a lot of British writers who are now neglected over here, like the late great Colin Wilson. They do this wonderful series called Paperbacks from Hell, and as you can see, they're A formats, and they are reissues of classic horror novels from the 70s and 80s. They're not cheap. They usually retail about $11.99. Some of them are not available in the UK for copyright reasons. And recently, I've just managed to acquire Gwen in Green by Hugh Zachary, who is an obscure writer who worked under many pseudonyms. And I used to have a UK copy of this, which had a different cover. This is the first ever US reissue, and this is about a woman and man who moved to a small island, and she gets rather overtaken by plants. It's very, very strange. I'm looking forward to reading that again. As you see, beautifully lurid cover there. Gwen in Green. Fantastic. Very uncommon book in the British edition, which sadly I no longer have. Here's an interesting one, which I bought earlier in the year. This is The Tribe by Barry Wood, which is like a retelling of the Jewish legend of the Golem. Now, Barry Wood wrote a book called Twins, which was based on a true story, and it was made into the classic 80s film Dead Ringers by David Cronenberg. So fantastic stuff. And these are the original covers these books had at the time. So another one to look out for. There's a whole range of these, because there is a book called Paperbacks from Hell by Grady Hendrix, which looks at the whole history of horror publishing, particularly in the 70s and 80s in America. The last one of those I'm going to show you is one. This one's not available in the UK. You can get it online because the copyright is still sort of held by a UK publisher. This is Nest of Nightmares by Lisa Tuttle, who's a Texan writer who lives in Scotland. She's very talented. She was once George R. R. Martin's girlfriend. They wrote a book together called Windhaven in the 70s. She later married Christopher Priest and was his wife for some years. She's had a long career in science fiction, fantasy and horror stories. She edited the Encyclopedia of Feminism back in the 80s. And look at that for a cover. That's the way that looked originally then in Sphere. My Sphere one is long gone, and these books are all super collectible in the original editions. And sort of great sort of horror stories. So I've been rereading this, and it's great fun to revisit that. So if you want some good A format horror, Paperbacks from Hell are the things to go for. Check them out on the Valoncourt website. Do support Valoncourt because they're a great publisher. One of the more interesting books which came out in the UK in a trade paperback. This is it from last year, and that's a trade paperback in wraps. There you go. They're not flaps, they're wraps. And this is The Arrest by Jonathan Lethem. And it had this cover in hardcover in the States. Beautiful looking book. And as you see, it looks rather like sort of a Thunderbird's mole type digger there. And this is a sort of an SF novel. Lethem's work has hardly ever been actually marketed or packaged as SF. It's now out in a standard UK B format with a different cover, which isn't as good. And this is sort of like set in a future where all tech things just stop working, and he's very witty, very good, and you know, he has loads and loads of praise. He's had a great career, and he's never sort of been tarred by the genre brush. So that's out in standard format paperback now. As I say, sadly, it doesn't look as nice as this in its standard format. Worth picking up if you like a good bit of literary satirical SF. If you've got friends who say, you know, I don't read science fiction, but they read this sort of thing, you know, they'll enjoy that. So that's rather good. Somebody I've been rereading this year after a long hiatus is the very wonderful Scott Bradfield, who has his own channel. I've mentioned it many times. Do check it out. He's a very witty writer of short stories, essays, really sort of great guy, and very funny indeed. And this is a copy I acquired this year. This is from about 1990. of his book Greetings from Earth, New and Collected Stories. A lot of his books are available on Amazon, and I've read about half of these, and this is actually a signed one. Look at that, isn't that nice? And just looking through it, you can get some of his novels and short story collections online. And for example, there's a short story in here called Dazzle, about a dog with existential problems, who's an intellectual, and Scott's expanded that into a longer work. So I really recommend Dazzle, and very, very funny stuff. And there's great stuff in here from all genres. And do check him out. Scott Bradfield, one of the best book channels on the internet, really witty short story writer and very perceptive critic, and very, very widely read, which is what I like. So Scott Bradfield, man to watch out for. Look out for his books on Amazon. So something that was reissued early this year by a very obscure Japanese writer was this book by Osamu Dazai. Osamu Dazai committed suicide by walking into a river in, I think, 1948. And he wrote a book called Travels of the Purple Tramp, which I read way back in the 80s. And, I don't think I've until recently, I'd never met anybody who'd even heard of him, let alone read him. And he's kind of a precursor of Yukio Mishima. He was born around 1909, 1910. And the edition of this that you will see this out there is larger than this. This is an older one. It has a pink cover, and it's called No Longer Human. And it's had a lot of attention this year. It's a very, very bleak, dark book about somebody who's sort of bullied at school and feels like a real outsider. But I really recommend it. So this edition is also available, which is called A Shameful Life. So if you've suddenly got into Dazai, because they've just reissued another one, and you have No Longer Human, A Shameful Life is the same book. So watch out for that. But yeah, if you like Japanese literature, and it's brief, economical, and it's got that sort of self-loathing thing that people like Yukio do really well. So worth checking out for all you existentialists out there. Earlier in the year, I did a clip about my sort of collection of books by Shval and Walu, the king and queen of Scandinavian crime fiction. And I'm very dedicated to Per Walu. Per Walu, who died in his early 50s after completing the 10th Martin Beck series book. I got this from the States in vintage. You're not likely to walk into a bookshop and find this. Per Walu is a real obscurity in the UK. He was a Marxist, and this is a great novel called The Assignment. And it's about a politician who's sent to a decaying South American republic, and things are sort of falling apart. And it's kind of a political thriller, but it's got very, very pointed sort of critiques of totalitarianism in it. And I love Walu's work. And in the new year, I'm going to talk about this and some of his other books at some length. But I would say, if you're browsing your local bookshop and you come across the crime section and you see the Martin Beck series by Per Walu and his partner stroke wife Maj Shval, pick them up, read them in order, begin with Rosanna. But if you ever see anything else by him, get it, because he's absolutely fantastic and sadly neglected. I think these should be in Penguin Modern Classics, personally. So that's something to watch out for if you like to look into the sort of more unusual areas of popular yet literary European writing. I've read a lot of non-fiction this year. I'm not going to cover non-fiction too much in this video because I've read a lot of political and scientific things, and some of them aren't that new, so I'm not really going to go into those. Again, this is not a new book, but I enjoyed it. This is Psychogeography by Merlin Coverley. Merlin Coverley's written some interesting books in this area. And if you want to do a good introduction into what psychogeography is, it's a term that's bandied around a lot. It's about walking, it's about the self, it's about literary experimentation, political revolution. It's a very, very woolly concept. It's difficult to get hold of. And even when you've read this, you will still feel that, because it's very ill-defined, but it's very interesting. This is published by, let's have a look. Oldcastle Books, who do No Exit Press, the crime publishers, who are fantastic. And this is really good. And I read 2 of Merlin's books this year, and this is fantastic. The other one, which is on hauntology, is probably the best non-fiction book I've read this year. I'm going to cover that in a video all on its own, as I've already said briefly in another video. So that's a good one to watch out for. A couple of older books now, which haven't exactly been reissued in recent years. They've been there for a while, but they've had coverage in the mass media, and that means their popularity has grown. And that really pleased me because they're fantastic books, and they're getting a bigger audience now probably than they've ever had. First of these, and because the Netflix adaptation, which I don't like, I think it's completely miscast and I think it looks really silly, but people have loved it. But if you try to watch it and you found it silly, don't ignore the book. And I'm talking about Walter Tevis' novel, The Queen's Gambit. The Queen's Gambit came out in the early 80s. It's about a female chess master. There was never any such thing then. I don't know whether there's been one now. They were all men. And she is orphaned, grows up in an orphanage, becomes addicted to painkillers. It's a very sort of dark story. And Tevis was an alcoholic, and he wrote about this a lot in books like The Man Who Fell to Earth, which was filmed with David Bowie, the science fiction film, and a great, amazing novel. And he wrote about games and sport a lot. He wrote The Hustler, which was filmed with Paul Newman, the one about pool. And this is a great book, and I read this when it first came out, and again a few years ago, and it's absolutely magnificent, and it's there's nothing else like it. So if you've been put off by the Netflix series or didn't like it, or if you like chess, give this a go. I mean, one book that I'd recommend people who like chess is the novella Chess by Stefan Zweig, also known as Chess Story. And I've just seen an edition with another title which doesn't mention chess at all. But quite honestly, compared to this, they're nothing. They're very traditional. It's not, Zweig, I personally feel, is a bit overrated. This is an amazing novel by an amazing writer who you really should read. Queen's Gambit, fantastic. Get it. The other one I'm going to mention is a book which I read probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and it's very close to my heart. And I first discovered it in the early 80s when I started in the book trade, and it had been out for 2 or 3 years then. It had been a minor bestseller. It's a book from the late 1940s, Italian, called Christ Stopped at Ebbsfleet by Carlo Levi. And Carlo Levi was a Marxist intellectual who during, just before World War II and during World War II, he was exiled from the north of Italy. And of course, Italy is very much country two halves. The north is industrial and urban, and the south was then rural and backward. And the fascists, they were strange, really. They weren't as, they weren't great, but they weren't as savage as the Nazis. And they used to do a lot of things like exiling people rather than shoot them or stab them or what have you, or send them to a concentration camp. And Levi was sort of a painter, a writer. He was trained as a doctor, though he never really practiced. And he got exiled to a town near Matera in southern Italy, where there was terrible, terrible poverty. Malaria was rife there. And this is a story of that. He spent about 2 years there before he was allowed to go home. And this was on the TV series Right Around the World, presented by Richard E. Grant, which I knew was coming. I knew it was coming for months and months and months before it came out, possibly a year or two before, because I read that it was coming out. And then the BBC just stuck it in the schedules of the advertising it. So the entire book trade was unprepared. And the very first one they showed, it's on the iPlayer again at the moment, was about southern Italy, which is one of my passions. And I loved this book when I read it, and it's been really popular since then. And I was selling it regularly anyway, because I do have a certain ability to talk people into buying things. And it's a strangely uplifting story, because you see people in a dreadful situation and a man who did what he could to help them. And I just found it absolutely wonderful. And there is a old Rai TV series of this with Gian Maria Volante, who played, he was the villain in A Fistful of Dollars, and he played a different villain in For a Few Dollars More, the famous spaghetti westerns opposite Clint Eastwood. And he was a Marxist actor. And there's a shortened film version, which I've got on DVD. And apparently the full-length TV version has been remastered this year and is going to be reissued this year. I think it might have happened already in Italy. It's probably going to happen next year, the rest of the world, and it's well worth seeing. So that's Christ Stopped at Ebbsfleet. Anybody who's interested in Italy, Italian literature, World War II, absolutely fantastic book. And, it really does linger in the mind. And there's something very uplifting about it. It's hard to say why, but that's a great one. I'm going to close with an obscure SF novel. by the Strugatsky brothers, the Russians. And because these days the Strugatsky brothers, they're becoming more and more well known. More of their books are in print now than have ever been around. They're most famous for Roadside Picnic, which was filmed as Stalker by Tarkovsky. Tarkovsky, of course, was the Russian director who made the original version of Solaris. Stalker's had a huge cult for decades. Beautiful looking, very enigmatic science fiction film. The Strugatskys, are becoming more and more fashionable, which is great because a lot of their work was in print in Britain and America in the 70s. Then it lapsed, and in recent years it's really come back. And I think there's 8 or 9 Strugatsky brothers books available in the UK now. And I met them briefly at the Worldcon in '87. And this is Lame Fate, Ugly Swans. And this is interesting because Lame Fate is about a writer, and inside his book Lame Fate, his story, there's another novel called Ugly Swans. So Ugly Swans is nested inside Lame Fate, which is really clever. And there is a film of Ugly Swans, which I saw earlier this year. I got a DVD from somewhere in Europe, probably from Russia, I can't recall. And it's really cracking stuff. It's got a lot of the familiar Strugatsky brothers themes, mutations, strange things going on. This is from Chicago Review Press. You won't really find it in many bookshops. I mean, I had to get this online. Even a book trade insider like me sometimes has to go online. And this is one to watch out for. So Strugatsky brothers fans, you may not know this is out there. So that's a little treat for you. So there's a few ideas what you might want to spend your book tokens on. Of course, you can't spend them online. There's lots of other things out there. That's just some of the things I read this year. Next year, who knows what I'll read. I'm a great believer that if you just read new books all the time, you don't get the best of literature. You have to remember that an awful lot of books are published every year, about 100,000 in the UK. Most of them fall by the wayside. That's not because they're bad. Often they're really good. Because what sells is what gets publicity. But if you just read new books all the time, you never ever develop a knowledge of the corpus of literature, of what's out there that's interesting, what's worthwhile. So I say, be experimental, take risks. You will develop instincts of your own as time goes on if you take risks. Do get yourself some good reference books. I mean, this which I mentioned earlier on, Penguin Modern Classics book, invaluable book of reference. That will take you into all sorts of areas. And if you get this, there'll be lots of names in it. Even if you haven't read them, look at the more obscure names, because that way you'll find some real gems. So this is Outlaw Bookseller. That's sort of part 2 of what I've been reading this year. More books to come in 2022. Goodbye for now.